Iran, the indestructible empire. Imagine a country that absolutely everyone tried to destroy. Alexander the Great burned it to the ground. Fanatical Arab hordes conquered it, erasing its ancient religion. Genghis Khan's Mongols slaughtered it to the core, turning blossoming cities into mountains of skulls. In the 20th century, global superpowers carved it up among themselves, and today it lives under the harshest sanctions in human history. Any other state in its place would have long since become just a line in a history textbook, a chapter titled Ancient Civilizations That Went Extinct. But not Iran. Iran is not just a dot on a map. It is a phoenix civilization. Every time the world thinks the Persian question is settled, Iran rises from the ashes. And it does so with such elegance that its captors don't even notice how they themselves become Persians. How do they pull it off? Why is Iran the only empire of antiquity that remains a top-tier player, making the White House and the entire Western world nervous? And what is the secret of this mystical resilience that allows Iran to digest its enemies for 25 centuries? Today, we embark on a journey through the DNA of the most stubborn empire in history. The birth of Persia. To understand why Iran is impossible to break, you must first look at where it resides. Iran is not just a country, it is a natural fortress. Imagine a giant, high-altitude plateau surrounded on all sides by walls of impassable mountains. 3,000 years ago, tribes calling themselves Aryans arrived on this plateau. This is where the name comes from, Iran, the land of the Aryans. And these people realized immediately, to survive here, you had to be either very strong or very smart. Ideally, both at once. For a long time, the Persians were the little brothers. They lived in the shadow of mighty Media, a vast kingdom that dictated terms to the entire region. The Persians paid tribute, supplied soldiers, and seemed destined to remain on the sidelines of history. Until a man whose name is still spoken with awe stepped onto the stage. Cyrus II, the Great. Cyrus was not your typical Eastern despot who simply wanted to burn cities. He had a better plan. In 550 BC, he led a revolt against his own grandfather, the Median king Astyages. And, most surprisingly, the Median army simply defected to his side. Why? Because Cyrus offered them partnership instead of slavery. It was the first geopolitical startup in history, and it took off like a rocket. In just 20 years, Cyrus created an empire the likes of which the world had never seen. He captured legendary Babylon, but instead of destroying it, he entered the city as a liberator. Think about it. In an era where the norm was to slaughter the population of a captured city and drag the survivors into slavery, Cyrus released the Cyrus Cylinder, the first declaration of human rights in history. He allowed the Jews to return from Babylonian captivity to Jerusalem. He did not ban foreign gods or impose his own language. Cyrus established the core code of Iranian statehood. We are not just conquerors, we are organizers of chaos. He realized that an empire lasts long not when it intimidates everyone, but when everyone in that empire finds it beneficial to stay. But Cyrus was only the beginning. His successors would turn this idea into a giant machine that would function for centuries. A machine called Achaemenid Persia, the greatest empire of antiquity. Think about this number. Almost every second person living on the planet in the 5th century BC was a subject of the Persian king. It was the first global superpower in history. But how do you manage such a colossus without the internet or railroads, when your decrees travel by horseback across deserts? Cyrus's successor, Darius I, was not just a warrior, he was a genius manager. He divided the empire into satrapies, the prototypes of modern states or provinces. And here lies the second secret of Iranian survival: flexibility. The Persians told the conquered nations, "We don't care which gods you believe in or what language you sing lullabies in. Pay your taxes, supply your soldiers, and recognize the authority of the King of Kings, and we will leave you in peace." To prevent this giant system from falling apart, Darius created the ancient internet, the Royal Road. Persia's courier service worked so precisely that letters traveled thousands of kilometers in a week. Herodotus wrote of them, "Neither snow, nor rain, nor heat, nor gloom of night stays these couriers from the swift completion of their appointed rounds." Sound familiar? Yes, this is the motto of the modern U.S. Postal Service, which they borrowed from the ancient Persians. And the heart of the empire became Persepolis. This was not a military fortress, it was a showcase. Gifts were brought here from all corners of the world: spices from Indians, elephant tusks from Ethiopians, fine fabrics from Greeks. Persepolis was meant to inspire one thought: resistance is futile, because we are the world. But if someone still decided to argue, the Immortals stepped onto the stage, an elite corps of 10,000 guards. Why Immortals? It was a psychological trap. As soon as one warrior died, another immediately took his place. From the outside, it seemed that the Persian army was a single, eternal, and invulnerable organism, whose numbers simply could not be reduced. Achaemenid Persia seemed eternal. It was too big to fall, too rich to grow poor, and too organized to crumble from within. But in the West, at the very edge of the world, a young man was already growing up, reading Homer, and dreaming of the impossible. And his name was Alexander, the man who destroyed Persia. In 334 BC, a storm descended upon Persia. His name was Alexander. To us, he is the Great, but to the Persians of that time, he was Alexander the Accursed. Imagine a giant empire, fine-tuned like a Swiss watch, suddenly faces a young madman who does not play by the rules. The Persian king, Darius III, fields against him hundreds of thousands of soldiers, war elephants, and scythed chariots. But Alexander passes through them like a knife through butter. At the Battle of Gaugamela, the colossus on feet of clay finally collapsed. Darius flees. He is betrayed and killed by his own satraps, and Alexander enters Babylon, Susa, and finally, sacred Persepolis. Here, something happens that Iranians cannot forgive the West for, even after 2,300 years. Persepolis, symbol of world harmony, was burned. They say it was the drunken whim of Alexander's mistress, Thais of Athens. They say it was revenge for burned Greek temples. Whatever the case, the greatest city of antiquity turned into a pile of ash. It seemed like the end. The end. Persia erased. In its place now lay Hellas. But right here is where that very magic of Iran manifests. Alexander conquered Persia by force of arms, but Persia conquered Alexander by force of its culture. Just a few years pass, and the Macedonian king turns into a Persian Shah. He puts on gold-embroidered Eastern robes. He demands that stern Greek generals prostrate themselves before him like before a deity. He forces 10,000 of his soldiers to marry Persian women. The Greeks are furious. They grumble. "We came here to defeat barbarians, but our king himself has become a barbarian." Alexander dies young in Babylon, and his empire immediately falls apart. His generals, the Seleucids, try to impose a Greek way of life on Iran.
Let us
They
contemplate
build
the wisdom
theaters,
of the ancients
gymnasiums,
in this safe
and
place.
erect statues of Zeus.
Careful with
But
this one.
Iran
It is
simply
for the oil.
laid low. The Iranians did not rebel openly. They simply continued to speak their language, believe in their prophet Zoroaster, and wait. They knew foreigners come and go, but the Zagros Mountains stand forever. 2 centuries of the Greek yoke passed, and from the steppes to the northeast came those who returned to Iran its true face, the Parthians. Persia returns. By the 1st century BC, the world had become bipolar. In the west, Rome with its iron legions and the hubris of the Senate. In the east, a reborn Persia, now represented by the Parthians. The Romans, accustomed to defeating everyone, looked down on the Parthians. Just more Eastern barbarians, they thought. But the Parthians had a surprise in store for them, one that would enter military tactics textbooks forever. 53 BC, the Battle of Carrhae. The wealthiest man in Rome, Marcus Crassus, the same one who crushed Spartacus's rebellion, leads his legions into the heart of the desert. He expects a fair fight, wall against wall. But the Parthians had no intention of playing fair. Their horse archers circled the Romans, showering them with a hail of arrows. When the legionaries attacked, the Parthians fled. But as soon as they turned back, the Parthians would twist in their saddles and loose a deadly arrow while at full gallop. This is the famous Parthian shot. Rome suffered one of the most humiliating defeats in its history. The legion's standards were captured, and Crassus was killed. From that moment, Rome realized Iran is not prey, Iran is an equal rival. But the true golden age of the comeback happened a bit later, when the Sassanid dynasty came to power. If the Parthians were free-roaming riders, the Sassanids decided to return to Iran the imperial splendor of Cyrus and Darius. It was then that Shapur I ascended the throne. Think about this moment. In all of Roman history, only one emperor was ever taken prisoner by an enemy, and it was a Persian Shah who did it. Shapur I used Emperor Valerian as a footstool whenever he mounted his horse. And when Valerian died, his skin was stuffed and put on display in a temple, as a reminder to Rome of who the true King of Kings really was. Sassanid Iran became a cultural magnet. While Europe was sinking into the Dark Ages, universities, philosophy, and medicine flourished in Iran. It was then that the foundation of what we today call Persian style was laid. Poetry, exquisite gardens, complex court etiquette, all of it was born here to later conquer the entire world. Iran once again became the center of the universe. It stood on the Silk Road, controlling trade between China and Europe. It seemed as unshakable as the granite cliffs of the Zagros. But in the 7th century, from the south, out of the scorching sands of Arabia, came a force that no one took seriously, a force that would change Iran forever. The Great Turning Point. By the mid-7th century, 2 great empires, Byzantium and Sassanid Iran, resembled 2 heavyweight boxers in the 12th round. They had been battering each other for decades, exhausting their treasuries and bleeding their armies dry. And at that moment, when both giants could barely stay on their feet, those whom no one expected emerged from the scorching sands of Arabia. The Arabs. Fanatical, highly mobile, and inspired by a new religion, Islam. In 636 AD, at the Battle of Al-Qadisiyah, the unthinkable happened. The army of the King of Kings, clad in the finest armor of the time, was defeated by desert dwellers. The last Sassanid Shah, Yazdegerd III, fled eastward toward China, begging for help from everyone he met, until he was ignominiously killed by a simple miller for the sake of a golden belt buckle. It was a collapse, a total one. The Arabs brought with them not just a new power, but a new language, a new faith, and a new alphabet. Zoroastrianism, the religion of fire that had ruled Persian minds for 1,000 years, began to fade. It seemed Iran was destined for the fate of Egypt or Mesopotamia, complete Arabization, the loss of its language, and dissolution into the vast caliphate. But it was precisely here that Iran pulled off its most daring trick in history. The Iranians realized, you cannot defeat the Arabs on the battlefield. Therefore, you must defeat them from within. They embraced Islam, but they did it on their own terms. They did not become Arabs. They remained Persians who simply began to pray differently. They preserved their language, Farsi. They kept their festivals, such as Nowruz, the Persian New Year, which is pagan in its essence, yet the Iranians defended it even in the face of the caliphs. Furthermore, when the Arabs realized that governing a vast empire from Spain to India from a desert tent was impossible, they needed managers. And who came to the rescue? The Persians.
100 years after the conquest, the caliphate began to look like the Sassanid Empire, just under a green banner. Under the Abbasid dynasty in Baghdad, Persian viziers managed the finances, Persian scholars wrote the books, and Persian fashion dictated the lifestyle. Iran didn't just survive, it digested its invaders. It transformed Islam from an Arabian tribal faith into a global intellectual religion. And it was this very moment that became the springboard for what historians would call the Iranian Renaissance. In the next chapter, we will see how Iran became the brain trust of the entire planet. The Golden Age of Iran. There is a strange paradox in history. Usually, when a nation is conquered, its culture dies. But with Iran, the exact opposite happened. The Iranians looked at their Arab conquerors and said, "Okay, you have the faith. But we have the knowledge accumulated over 3,000 years. Let's unite." Thus began the Islamic Golden Age. But to be honest, it was a Persian Golden Age under the banner of the Caliphate. You use the fruits of this age every single day without even realizing it. Whether you love mathematics or hate it, the very word algebra comes from the title of a book by the Persian Al-Khwarizmi, and his name, pronounced in Latin, became the word algorithm. Without this Persian, you wouldn't have this video or the smartphone in your hands right now. And here is another example. Ibn Sina, known in the West as Avicenna. His Canon of Medicine was the primary textbook for doctors in Europe for 500 years. While in Paris, diseases were being treated with prayers and bloodletting. In Iran, they were already performing complex surgeries and describing infectious diseases. Or take Omar Khayyam. We know him as a poet, a lover of wine and philosophical quatrains. But to his contemporaries, he was, above all, a genius mathematician. The calendar he developed in the 11th century is more accurate than the Gregorian calendar we live by today. But science is only half the story. For an empire not to disappear, it needs a language. And here, a man enters the stage who single-handedly saved the Persian identity, Ferdowsi. At that time, Arabic was like English today, the language of the elite, science, and power. The Persian language, Farsi, was dying, turning into a kitchen dialect. Ferdowsi spent 30 years of his life writing the Shahnameh, the Book of Kings.
It consists of 60,000 couplets about the history of Persia, written in pure Persian without borrowings. Ferdowsi created a cultural bulletproof vest.
Thanks to him, Iran did not become part of the Arab world like Egypt or Syria. It remained Iran. During this period, Iran became the France of the East. Its poetry, its architecture, and its etiquette became the standard. Even in far-off India and Ottoman Turkey, courts spoke and wrote in Persian. This was the peak of cultural influence. But while poets composed verses about roses and nightingales, a cloud was already rising on the horizon that brought with it not just conquest, but the end of the world. The Mongols were marching to the east. The Mongols and the Catastrophe. If everything we discussed before was a trial, the 13th century was the end of the world for Iran. Literally. Imagine, you live in the most prosperous, educated, and wealthy country in the world, and suddenly, people arrive from the east whose only goal is to turn your cities into pastures for their horses. It all began with one fatal mistake. The ruler of Khwarezm, considering himself a new Alexander the Great, ordered the execution of Mongol ambassadors. Genghis Khan, who until then had planned only to trade, was enraged. He moved the entire might of his steppe machine against Iran. What happened next, historians call a demographic collapse. In Nishapur, the Mongols slaughtered every living thing, including cats and dogs. In Merv, according to various estimates, more than 1 million people were killed. Iran lost 3/4 of its population. The ancient irrigation systems, the qanats, which had been built over thousands of years, were destroyed. The blossoming Iranian Plateau turned into a desert littered with ruins. It seemed like the end. Iranian civilization was not just defeated, it was dismembered. But right here, the most incredible miracle in the history of empires occurs. Just a few decades pass, and the Mongol Khans, the grandsons of Genghis Khan who burned libraries, begin to restore those very libraries. The Mongols established their own state in Iran, the Ilkhanate, and very soon they discovered that it was impossible to govern this complex land without the Persians. The Iranians once again applied their superpower, intellectual seduction. Persian viziers, such as Rashid al-Din, effectively began to rule the Mongol Empire. They convinced the fierce riders of the steppes that building observatories was cooler than burning them, that writing poetry in Farsi was a sign of true greatness. In 1295, Ghazan Khan converted to Islam. He declared himself the protector of Iranian culture. Iran, like a vast ocean, simply swallowed the Mongol drop, dissolved it within itself, and became even stronger. Yes, Iran was physically destroyed, but its spirit proved so infectious that even the world's most brutal conquerors eventually became culturally Persian. Iran proved once again, it is impossible to destroy, because it lives not within borders, but in the minds of people. Modern Iran. Iran entered the 20th century in a strange state. Formally, it was never a colony, yet it was sliced up like a pie. In the north, the Russian Empire. In the south, Britain. And in the middle, oil, which became both a blessing and a curse for the nation. In 1953, the Iranians tried to say, you know, our oil belongs to us. In response, the CIA and MI6 orchestrated a coup, overthrowing the democratically elected Prime Minister Mossadegh. This was the moment Iran realized once and for all,
The West does not play by the rules. The last Shah of Iran, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, wanted to turn the country into the world's fifth industrial power overnight. He built factories, purchased the finest American fighter jets, and threw banquets in the desert costing hundreds of millions of dollars. But he made the same mistake the Greeks had made 2,000 years prior. He tried to force a foreign skin onto Iran, forgetting its deep conservative roots. In 1979, a social explosion occurred that the world still cannot fully digest: the Islamic Revolution. The world thought the revolution would finish Iran off. Neighboring Iraq, backed by the US, the USSR, and the entire Arab coalition, attacked the depleted nation. It was the longest and bloodiest conventional war of the 20th century after the World Wars. 8 years of hell. Iran fought alone against everyone, literally. And it was then that the survival code, established by Cyrus and the Sassanids, reawakened. When the enemy is at the gates, Iran turns into a monolith. They stood their ground without surrendering an inch of territory. But this war permanently etched a slogan into the regime's DNA: "We can trust no one but ourselves." Today, Iran is a land of paradoxes. It is a state that has lived under sanctions longer than any other country in modern history. There are attempts to strangle it economically, cut it off from technology, and isolate it from banks. But look at the facts. Iran ranks 4th in the world in oil reserves and 2nd in gas. Despite the blockade, it manages to build its own satellites, drones that are changing the course of wars in Europe, and develop a nuclear program. Iran has created the Shia Crescent, a network of influence from Lebanon to Yemen, effectively restoring the borders of ancient empires through different means. Modern Iran is not just bearded elders and missiles. It is millions of educated people who are proud to be Persians, even if they disagree with their government. Inside the country, a struggle boils over what Iran will be tomorrow. But on one thing Iranians are unanimous: they will not allow anyone from the outside to tell them how to live. Because they remember, they were an empire when the ancestors of their current teachers still lived in the woods. Final, why Iran matters. So, what is the secret? Why did Iran survive where Rome fell, Babylon vanished, and Egypt forgot its own language? The answer lies in a single concept that political scientists call a civilization state. Iran is not just a country created by politicians on the remains of colonies. It is a living organism with a memory spanning 2,500 years. Iran has developed a unique immunity. It has learned to turn defeats into victories. When it was captured physically, it captured the minds of its enemies. It turned Greeks into Eastern kings, Arabs into patrons of Persian sciences, and Mongols into builders of mosques. Today, the world often looks at Iran through the narrow slit of news about sanctions or nuclear deals. But to understand this country, one must look broader. Why is Iran so important today? First, geography. Whoever controls the Iranian Plateau controls the bridge between Europe, India, and China. Without Iran, no stable security architecture in Eurasia is possible. Second, resources. And it's not just about oil. Iran is one of the world's largest reservoirs of human capital. Its diaspora across the globe includes top scientists at NASA, Silicon Valley, and the world's leading universities. But most importantly, it is a precedent. Iran proves to the world that it is possible to be modern, high-tech, and influential while remaining true to one's ancient identity. It refuses to dissolve in the global melting pot, insisting on its right to be different.
The history of Iran is the story of a phoenix that has burned dozens of times, only to rise from the ashes every single time, becoming wiser and more formidable. The next time you see a headline about yet another crisis surrounding Iran, remember, this empire has seen hundreds of such crises. It has watched the greatest conquerors come and go, watched ideologies crumble and borders shift. The world may try to isolate Iran, try to change it, or try to subdue it. But history tells us one thing: Iran cannot be destroyed. One can only attempt to understand it. Because Persia is not the past. Persia is eternity.